Well, welcome back, everyone. Before we get started this afternoon with George Lake, I just wanted to say another thank you to our conference sponsors. If you joined a little bit late this morning, you might have missed the initial launch of our meeting. So thank you for being with us today, but also just wanted to say a quick thank you once again to our conference sponsors. They're all listed here, but more importantly, you can go within the Whova app and individually click on each of these sponsors to view any of the materials that they may have shared with us for this meeting. Furthermore, I also wanted to just highlight our executive committee once again. We are broken up into a public and private executive committee, public being any agency, university, extension folks, and private being our farmers. And so these are our executive committee members. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of them for helping to make this conference possible. Without all of you, we would not be here today. With that, I would like to introduce George Lake from Thistle Creek Farm. He's actually just right up the road from me. We share the same zip code, and he has an awesome operation. So with that, George, we can't wait to hear about your place.
Okay, very good. Okay, as soon as the pictures come up, I'll start. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. I get asked to speak quite a bit, not because I have a lot of knowledge like the professor that was just on. I've made all the mistakes. I think that's why I get asked, because I started so long ago. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I was speaking out at Nevada at the National Grasslands Coalition. And after I was done, this man who I knew had a 60,000 acre ranch came to me and he said, how big is your operation? And I said 600 acres. I tried to make it sound big, 600 acres, and didn't tell him that a third of it was leased ground. And he said, son, and I know I was at least a decade older than him. He said, son, I get my pickup in the morning. I drive all day. When the sun goes down, I'm not on the other side of my place. And I said, I know what you're talking about. I have a truck just like that. And so anyways, I'm not the big head in the room. I just like to talk about, I like to see small farms succeed, because I think small farms are the background of American agriculture. And if it's not profitable, it's not sustainable, as the last speaker pointed out. So I want to do the first part of my presentation is actually going to be on selling yourself. Build it, neighbor, come, as the old Kevin Costner movie stated. If you have a good product, you can sell yourself well. Next slide, please. This is a picture of, I always have a portable chicken coop with my cattle, and I always have more eggs than I need. I don't try to sell them, I just give them away, which does not put any soup on the table. So next slide, please. I'm going to speak about a friend. I meet farmers wherever I go. I get to travel free for the rest of my life, or I wouldn't make it past the county fair. But this is a farmer. His name is Les Kyle in the Cumbria area of England. 15, 20 years ago, it was an undiscovered area. But now there are so many hikers coming. This is his herd. This is the cows he milks every morning and every afternoon, 8 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He's going right by the little hotel where we stay, a 9-room hotel. And he makes 5 gallons of ice cream a day. Next slide, please. And very good ice cream. Well, that slide is just of his entire herd. On the right side, just 5 cows. And then the next slide. This is his area. People have, the British people have discovered how good the hiking is in his area. So he decided to take advantage of what he had in his area. He had always run sheep on these hills and always had a couple cows too. But now he has leased out his sheep ground and just milks 2 cows, makes 5 gallons of ice cream. Next slide. He and his dad built this little barn next to their barn his sister has a coffee shop on one side, and he has the ice cream on the other side. And his ice cream costs £3.75 for one scoop. That's $5 US. And 2 scoops is 5 pounds, which is about $7.50 US. And he only makes 5 gallons. And our son, who's a business major, he farms with us, but he's a business major, and he did some number crunching. He doesn't milk cows from January to February because no hikers come during that time. So that's his off season. He makes $420,000 to $500,000 a year just selling 5 gallons of ice cream a day. When his 5 gallons is gone, he just shuts down. He doesn't want to do any more than that. Next, and that's next picture. Yeah, this is his ice cream display case. It cost him $7,000. It rotates. His ice cream is stunningly good. And he can do this in the UK. He pasteurizes at 85 degrees. So he just has learned to sell himself in his area. And I think we all need to do that, to find out what in our area, either buy a product that really sells itself or what you can do in your area that would attract people to the product that you have. Next picture. The coming picture is a picture of a slide of our farm. I just took it this fall. In the top there, you can see a field of corn. And on the right, you can see a field of corn already partly grazed. We graze 20 acres of corn every winter. Jim Garrish talks about getting the hay out. And we have done that with our winter grazing for sheep and for cattle, but not for our feeders. Our feeders, to stay on the top of the grass-fed market, we feed our feeders in the wintertime, basically fermented sunshine that we made in the summer in ideal conditions. And they do quite well with that. We can keep the marbling that we need for our product. Next picture, please. And this is our components. We actually run now about 600 head of grass-fed beef, a little bit more. And our Dorper herd flock is up to about 150 Dorpers. We do 600 acres of grass, and we have a couple hundred acres that we rent where we make our winter forage. We use very little equipment. We don't even have a manure spreader for that many animals. We graze the feeders into November, and then they go to baleage, and our guy cows go to standing corn. Next slide. And this is how our strip grazing works. We do a 7-year rotation from grass to a year of corn, and then 2 years of sorghum Sudan grass behind that, and Ryan crimson clover as a cover crop between those years. But we actually consider a second crop because the crimson and rye makes up to 150 pounds of nitrogen fixation. We take it off though as baleage. We do graze it sometimes, but that usually comes off as baleage so we can get the next crop in. And it still has to leave around 80 units of nitrogen to the acre because we don't put fertilizer down. We do it all through the legumes and animals that have been grazing there. We do on our rental properties that we don't have any animals on, but not on the home farms. And then we always fall plant back into grass so that we don't have weed competition. Next slide. This is just until we got to 500 round bales a year. This is all the equipment we had, plus a mower and a rake. And even now, it's upgraded equipment, but it's still all we have is haymaking equipment. Next picture. This picture is in here because this is well, that's the workforce right there too. We really rely heavily on dogs, but they're sitting on the piece of equipment that we use to harvest our corn. We knock down corn with that and then move our grazing strips in whatever width we need for the day. Next slide. This is Ohio State's, after I wrote an article 12 to 15 years ago for Stockman Grass Farmer, and Ohio State did a 2-year study after that on what you would get from a ton of corn, and an acre of corn, I mean, and I think this is probably Roundup ready corn, I'm not sure. but we use non-GMO corns, and I think they do better actually for the cattle. But you can see just by looking at the crude protein that a dry stock is actually a good source of a maintenance diet. The only thing we add is minerals and salts. So next slide. And this is our fact sheet. We actually don't use any fertilizer anymore. I used to have a man who planted for me who would not put it in the ground. He's very conscientious, wouldn't plant for me if I didn't use corn starter. And about 5 years ago, he said, do you want corn starter this year? And I said, well, I thought you wouldn't plant if I didn't use it. And he said, I don't know how this works, but it works. So now we don't even have that cost per acre. Our seed is still $82 an acre for non-GMO type corn instead of $250 or whatever it is for Roundup Ready corn. It cost me $24 an acre to have it put on. We do burn down before we put the corn in. It's about the only burn down we have a year, over a 5-year period. And then labor and fuel, I'm knocking it down with a 4-wheeler. It's probably half of that. But even at that, on our home ground, it's $168 an acre. Next slide, please. And on our rental ground, because we're paying $100, and now we have some that we have to pay $150 for because we're in big dairy country. Even on a rental ground at $100 an acre, it's 41 cents a day. And Ohio State's test plot, which I was really surprised that they would get it that accurate to what, because it took me years to get down to that. It's 45 cents a day. We had a guy that the NRCS was helping to get started in this, and he's a seed stock producer in calves and March. So he decided that maybe it wasn't such a good idea. He put protein tubs out, and still his cost was only 50 cents a day. And he and the NRCS figured out at $110 a ton hay, it costs you $2.20. But when you're buying in hay, you're also putting down, for every ton, you're putting down about 800 pounds of fertilizer. So it's not all bad if you have to do that either. But in the 2015 corn year, and it was very similar here this year, we had 28 acres of corn, 110 cows, 100 for 170 days on that corn to get the cost. And the reason I share this is because it's just another way to keep your costs so much lower than, we're not taking equipment out, we're not hauling feed out to them. We are to our feeders, and we have 400 feeders, but not to our mama cows and not to our sheep. We don't winter the sheep and the mama cows in the same area very often, partly because of parasites. We have no parasites that cattle normally have because we don't rehost anything. We have a 35-day window before we come back to a pasture. And for sheep, we've gone to 60 days because of barber pole. We do have barber pole. It's the only parasite that we have to worry about. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And this is kind of what it looks like. There's no fighting at the bunk because there's plenty of space. And we have anywhere from 3-year-olds all the way up to 20-year-olds in the same field. And you can see the cow on the right chewing on a corn stalk. This was a very wet year. I think it was in November. When NRCS first saw me doing this, they're like, that can't be good. You got all that mud, but it's not really mud. It's all that corn stalk is pushed in there. If we get a really hard rain, it doesn't riverlet. It just runs off in sheets and much less very little topsoil really. Next slide. In fact, I took these corn stalks just a day after the cows had been eating, might have been 2 days. You can't do that with a machine. All that organic matter is being stomped into the soil where the microbes and the earthworms live. Instead of being on top of the soil, it's right down there in their homes. Next slide. I took this picture just 2 weeks ago, about 3 days after cattle had been in that particular part. And you can see that a lot of organic matter in the soil. You can see a kernel there as well of corn. You do get pass through of supposedly 7%. I think with non-GMO, it's probably less. And that'll come up as volunteer corn actually the next year in our sorghum, which is fine. They eat it just like they do the sorghum. And if you're doing bunk feeding, 15% loss is not unusual. It's probably normal. Next slide. When I came home to the farm, it was really a kind of a hard scrabble farm. It just produced actually 37 bushels the acre was the average. Well, our farm, 60 acres of our farm is an old abandoned sand quarry. It's been abandoned for 100 years, 101 years. And there's very little soil where that was located. I can go up there and get good quality mortar sand now, just right under the surface. But where we've been grazing, we've changed that a lot. Next picture, please. I put this picture in just so you could see, this is the same wet year that I took the other picture. That's not mud on the knees, that's from leaning down to pull the feed to them. If you open up a big space in wet conditions, they'll eat the ears, and the leaves and the stalk gets pushed into the ground, and you're going to lose a lot of the feed that you want to run through a cow. You can see a couple a little farther down already on their knees, pulling it underneath. Next picture. This is a picture from our farm that Alan Williams uses. He uses it in his Alan Williams University or whatever it is, a 7-day thing he talks about. It talks about 4 farms around the US, and this is one of them. He got this picture when I spoke down in Baton Rouge from someone. The sand on the right, or the dirt on the right, is actually the mortar quality sand. And the fence isn't right between these two, but it's about 15 to 20 feet apart. But that's 25 years of mob grazing, heavy hoof pressure on that same sandy soil. And if you look closely, you can see the sand granules in there, but it's been replaced by microbes and earthworms and beneficial bacteria, fungi, and everything that you would want in very nutrient dense soils. Just by, I think that an animal's hoof is the best tillage equipment there is. Next slide. This is just a picture of a wall I built in 2000 with the same mortar. I just went up with a shovel and an old sifter that my grandfather had and sifted out the sand that I needed to build this wall. Next picture. And this is a picture I put in here because we had such a violent wind came through, it knocked the tops off of our corn, but it's still very, this is 2 years ago, still very usable. The ears don't go to the ground. And the reason it stands up when other people's fields go down is the corn root's not a deep root anyhow, but it has to go down and get its own feed. It doesn't get fed on the surface. So a situation like that, and we had kind of the same this year, takes the tops off, but we can still graze it all. Next picture. And this is shortly after Dr. Tooker, an entomologist from Penn State, was out to slice through my corn stalks. I plant corn. I have to special order it. No fungicide, no insecticide. I just want it bare when it goes in the ground because of not wanting to kill predator insects. 3 years ago, we had a national guy. I know he's an entomologist, but I don't know what his national title was. He came with 18 specialists from around I think just in a 3-state area, but I'm not sure about that. And they were talking about, well, we were standing in a 22-acre field of alfalfa, and I had said we hadn't used an insecticide in the 38 years or so that I'd been home. And the one lady looked at me kind of accusatorily and said, "You obviously sprayed your alfalfa," because every field, every farm around was yellow that year. It was 2018. And I looked at her in shock, and this national guy said, "You have a lot of lightning bugs, don't you?" And I said, "By the hundreds and the thousands." I said, "I come out here at night with my wife and we'll just sit and watch the light show." And he said, they're alfalfa, leafhopper, weevil, predator. And I was shocked. I always thought they were just something fun to watch. I had no idea that they were a predator, but we really like the predator insects. And the same guy was telling me, or telling the group, that I think it's Gabe Brown's farm in South Dakota. He speaks for South Dakota University sometimes. And he told people you don't need to be putting, the rootworm controls, insecticides on your seed and on your fields. He said, you just destroy the natural, the way things were created to work. And they told him afterwards, I said, you can't be telling people that. Somebody's going to go out and plant 800 acres of corn and they'll lose it, and it will, and you're the one that set them up. He said, I'm telling you that if you do it right, you won't have rootworm problems. And he said, nothing, there is no predator insects that eats rootworm. And he said, well, what happens if you put too many cows in a field and you don't take them out? And then they said, well, yeah, they'll eat everything in that situation. He said, well, I'm telling you, that's it. So they planted on his place 1,000 corn rootworm eggs per linear foot in a test plot. Went back 6 weeks later and found nothing. And that's the way it works here. We have no problems with. We don't need an insecticide because we have natural predators to take care of that. And last year, a year ago, we had a very, very dry year. And we have so much ability to absorb water from the organic matter that cattle have stomped into the fields that everybody around us had like 20 acres, 20 to 25 acres was the average. And so they said, you need to call the adjuster, you're going to have a claim this year. So and my corn wasn't as good as normal, but I thought it wasn't too bad except for a few areas. So I called and the guy came out. We went in the worst area of the field and it was 74 bushels the acre. And I said, well, I'll take you around to the other side because it's not so good either. And it was 120. And he looked at me and said, you don't have a claim. I said, well, I didn't think I did, but I thought I better call. And he said, well, so he said, I do all the farms from Harrisburg to Pittsburgh. He said, what do you do differently? I said, well, I don't use any insecticide. I don't use any fungicide. I don't use any fertilizer, not corn starter, not side dressing. And he looked at me and said, that makes absolutely no sense. What is it that you do that is different than other people? And I said, well, my cattle have stomped so much organic matter into the soil that when it rains hard, every bit of it goes into the soil. We had one rain, it was 0.8 of an inch, and it came down so fast. My wife and I were still drinking coffee in the morning, and it just looked like somebody held a garden hose over the rain gauge. And I said, I think I better go out and take a look. And there was no runoff ours at all. We lost some gravel on one of our lanes, but we didn't lose any soil. And I got a call about 20 minutes later from my grandson and said, can you bring the dogs down and round up my sheep? I lost them in that rain. And I went down to that farm, which is a rental farm, to a big dairy. And there had been so much runoff that it overwhelmed the culverts. There was debris above it on that road. And it just looked like somebody had plowed down to where the stream was. So we got a full 0.8 of an inch. And if that farm got a tenth of an inch, I would be surprised. So when you get a lot of organic stomped into the soil, your water retention will go way up as well. Next picture. And this is February 14th, Valentine's Day, 2015. And this is what it looks like when we're grazing in really bad weather. And the cow on the right is our old number 34. She was 19 years old in this picture. She had a calf that spring, and then the next year she came up open and she left the farm. But you can see the body score, and that takes good genetics as well. We use a lot of Scottish, Aberdeen, the old line Angus genetics. It's a great maintenance diet if you have good genetics. And we don't want calves on them. You can actually have calves on them as weanlings in standing corn if the animals are if the animal itself is grazing the corn. We don't want that. We want them to build a baby, and we don't want any animals on them when they go into the corn. Next picture. It's just another picture of the animal's waiting for me to move the sticks. I have this, you can see those round things in between the cows and the corn. That's actually old wagon wheels that I welded sticks on. So when the ground's frozen, I can just toss the line in, and you can see the two little bit that's knocked down there. That's actually probably done with a four-wheeler. It might have been with a snowmobile, but usually a four-wheeler. And that's all they're going to get moved for. I move them twice a day in that. Next picture. And this is just to show you the difference between wet ground, where I can push all the organic matter in with cattle feet, to this one where I'm going to have a lot of material on the surface. And we do subsoil the field that they've been in all winter if it's if we don't have a good heave, if we don't have a good frozen line, and then we have to deal with that a little bit. Usually we can plan through it pretty well. Next picture. Will that play as a video, Jen? No, it won't do it. Okay, then go down. I don't think it'll do it. I have to do it off of mine. Just another picture of the cattle grazing. The next picture, please. This is just a picture of beginning of 10 inches of snow. I put these mama cows down in here because I was afraid the snow would get too deep for them to graze through. This is early on before I realized how well they can graze. They can graze through anything, and the sheep too, which I didn't think would work either. But it snowed 10 inches before they were done, and they got it as short as I wanted it to be before that happened. The next picture. This is just our cover crop. We can either graze it. This one is just ryegrass, Italian ryegrass, before I realized that I needed to put a crimson or a legume in there. But we just consider it a second crop. It's just, we don't like bare grounds. We always wanted a cover, but now the cover crop has become quite important to our operation. Next. And this is just a picture of us baling what we didn't graze. This is triticale. We don't use that very often. It has a much shorter window for us. We prefer the ryegrass and crimson clover, but triticale works pretty well too. Next. We do a lot of broadcasting of seed. This field I rented from a guy. Is too steep to do anything with it. And we could drive the cattle to his place and graze it. He had fence and water. In fact, it's hard to, you have to go straight up and down. You can't see how steep it is and rocky with a four-wheeler to spread it. But this is a picture of just overgrazing intentionally, so to be less competition when what we spread in front of the cows when it comes up. Next. This picture is in Sarah Flack's book, Arts and Science of Grazing. That's a burdock, and she had come to the farm and asked like the day before, and I had no idea who she was actually at the time, but she did a lot of the pictures in her book are from here, and it was a beautiful field of green fast from King's Agri-Seed. And I said to her, this is before we were in here, before the cattle came in. I sent this to her afterwards. I said, I don't understand why they always go to the burdock when this grass is so beautiful. And it was 10 o'clock in the morning, so the sugars weren't really very high in the grasses yet. The orchard grass was 4.5%. I think the fescue was just 3%. And she said, well, we'll just give it, well, she had a Brix meter. She said, we'll just test it. And I said, I think it's the fiber. I think it's such a washy grass, they need fiber. So we went over to this plant actually and took a leaf, and she was squeezing with her garlic press and couldn't get a drop out. And I said, I told you, it's the fiber. But she got a drop on her Brix meter. It was 14%. She said, man, I'm going to have to call a professor friend of mine that deals with weeds. So we don't have very many burdocks anymore because the cows just take them off. And we've done cattle for just about every weed we have, we've been able to control with cattle. We had a problem, several acres of Canadian thistles that I would mow every year because I don't like to spray if we don't have to. And it just seemed to like rejuvenated. It always seemed like it was better the next year. So one year I thought, I'm not even going to hook the mower up. I'm just going to trap about 100 or 200 cows over that 2 acres for the night. The next day it was flattened like I expected it. But apparently Canadian thistle, the roots can't take the hoof pressure that a grass can take. That 2 acres never came back. We still don't have Canadian thistles, and that was 10 or 15 years ago. Next. This is just the way we run cattle. We shoot for a high density, and people talk about 250,000 pounds per acre. It doesn't really matter. It renews the grass a lot faster if you can really push heavy like this. This is the first move of the day. And this will be in May with the first time through grass as well. It'll be mid-thigh. Beautiful grasses. We do grasses from all around through King's Agri-Seeds. It's really been good mixes for us. It's supposed to last 3 to 4 years. We always get 4 to 5 out of it. We could go longer, but we don't, because we're in an area where you rent ground. It's quite expensive. You really need to make it pay. Next slide. And this is, so it's first move of the morning. So this is like a 12-hour overnight period. And you can see there's more damage there than there would be if by the end of the day, because we move them 3 times a day in grass and 5 times a day in sorghum. But you can see the benefit of pushing organic matter into the soil. And we like to leave 6 to 8 inches when we're going through. So we don't graze heavy. Our son used to say, Dad, we're leaving so much feed here. And I said, no, we're not. We're feeding livestock in the soil. Next. We get a lot of predator insects, a lot of butterflies. One journalist was here, said, I've never been on a farm that has so many butterflies. I never thought about that, but we do. And we really try and make things work for the pollinators. We'll leave some things go into bloom. We'll mow around milkweed so that the butterflies will have that for their nesting. Next slide. We use dogs for a lot of things. We run cattle up and down the highways because our land that we own and rent is not contiguous. It works really well for us. Cattle get quite used to it, but with the dogs, we can go right past people's fields and not worry about them getting into the fields, and it saves us all the transportation costs. I just walked almost a month ago now. I walked our flock of sheep from a farm that we wintered them on through the woods, over 5 miles. We had taken them up there with trucks, 3 trailer loads, and 2 guys, half a day. I had them back in an hour and 20 minutes, 1 person and 1 dog. So with the cost of fuel and the difficulty of finding labor, the dogs become even more important to our operation. Next picture. That's just our feeder group coming back from having been down to our working pens for a sort. And the next picture. This one wasn't supposed to be in there. That was actually me trying to do it with, before I found out about dogs, good working dogs, I thought I could do it with horseback. Didn't work nearly as well. Next picture. We got into sheep, not really thinking about how well they would work together with cattle. We got into them because when I was 14 years old, I asked my dad if I could fence off the stream. I didn't fish, but I didn't like the way the cattle broke it down and made it wider and less attractive. And he said I could in the evenings after we're done milking, which is about 6:30 at night. And but he wasn't going to help me with anything. I'd have to get whatever I found around the farm. I found a lot of old barbed wire and woven wire and posts that had been thrown, cast aside. It was ugly, a fence, but it stopped the cattle. But then 30 years later, you not only couldn't see the stream, you couldn't even hear it anymore. And I didn't want to clear it mechanically, and I didn't want to clear it chemically. So I thought, well, I'll just give sheep a try. And sheep water's a natural barrier. It takes all my dogs to get them to cross a stream. They just don't like water. So I can graze it till it looks like a golf course, or keep them back some so that they're not destroying a native species. Stinging nettle, they really like stinging nettle, and this pasture was full of it. You couldn't walk through that pasture without gloves because it was just, your hands would be burning. And I thought it would do that to their throats and they would never eat it, but they eat it, and it's a native, so I don't let them eat all of that. But sheep are a different ruminant. They die more easily. They get poisoned more easily. But they're such a great animal to work in with the cattle, and separately. We've really come to enjoy the sheep. Next slide, please. And this is just a picture I put in there because I wanted to show how we overgrazed it intentionally, because this is in August. We always overgraze in August, the sorghum, so that we can plant into it without using any kind of weed control, and get it in the fall, and it's up in time. Sometimes we even graze it in the fall. And we stockpile a lot of grasses for winter feeding of the cattle, and even the feeders, but normally for the cattle. And if it's too wet a winter, then we graze it all with sheep, because they don't do nearly the damage to the soil, to the roots. Next picture. And this is actually a little bit of a video, which won't be able to play now, but it I just opened that up. You can see how, if I was playing this video, you'd see how quickly they eat it. This has a lot of different species in it, from cowpeas to sunflowers, that really work well in the soil. And we overgraze that one too. We only graze it once, overgraze it so we can plant that one back into grass. Next slide. That's just a picture of it before I turned them into it. And next slide. And that's the last move of the day, which I usually do about an hour or two before dark. As you can see, there's a lot of organic matter on the ground, because that sorghum is getting pretty tall, and they'll eat the leaves and knock the rest down, and just becomes more of what we're feeding the livestock in the soil. And then there's you can skip, that's just a video that you can find on our Instagram. Next picture, please. And this is another picture of Les Kyle coming by the little hotel we stay in. And I just put that up there because I really want to see small farms succeed, and be able and be profitable enough to be able to support a family. And we've been able to do that. We've really been blessed with being able to do that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our parasite control for both the cattle and sheep. Our daughter's a veterinarian, is in a 6-vet practice, and she was there she was here at the farm one time in February after work, and I was bringing in some that obviously the genetics weren't what I wanted for winter, because they lost some full body score. She said, "Dad, when was the last time you used parasite control?" I said, 3 years ago. She says, "Dad, you have to be loaded with parasites." I said, "I read the life cycle of cattle parasites." I said, "I don't come back to a field in 35 days. I'd be wasting my time. And I don't like the idea of putting anything on an animal's back and I'm going to eat that meat." And I didn't realize at the time that it would also kill whatever predator insects could live in that cow manure. And she said, "Dad, this is what I went to school for." And I said, "Well, do you think the companies that pay your school $10 million a year for research don't want something back?" I said, "I don't think I need them." I said, I'll bring some samples up to the vet's office." So I did. And the lead vet's retired now, but he was a great large animal vet. And he said, and it spun out 0 parasites. And I was expecting low. I wasn't expecting 0. And he said, "Oh, he just brought the best he had." And I said, "I'll tell you what, I want all these skinny ones that I'm getting rid of this year, or ones that didn't keep the body score. I want them all checked. I want them checked for everything, Iones, parasites." So we did that, and everything came up 0. So then I thought, well, maybe their equipment's not that good. So I took some more samples over to Penn State and had them spun out over there, and it was 0 parasites. And we've been able to do the same thing with sheep, rotating with the cattle, because we don't we never come back in time to rehost. But we were having trouble, especially the wet year of 2018, with a sheep. If we had a long drive, like a 3-mile sheep drive, we might have one just fall over and die. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And so, and our daughter was with me when one of them fell over, and she said, "Dad, that has to be parasites." And she looked at its lips, and it was really pale. And I said, "Well, I'm not rehosting anything. I don't understand that." And we had him checked, and sure enough, it was barber pole. And I asked Dr. Soder about it, and she said, "You're probably coming back into a field when they're the most vibrant." And so now we do 60 days with the sheep. And so we're actually running separately. We run them together, but then when we come back through a second time, the sheep are on a different rotation altogether, because I want to get ahead of barber pole as well without using any parasite control. And when the specialists were here, one of the things they checked was the manure. And where I'd had 400 animals 3 days before we went into this field, it took about 30 yards for 18 people to get on a cow pie. And they had these digging tools. I was digging with my finger. I just found it so fascinating. Every dung beetle that can live in Pennsylvania lived there. There's 3 of them. And these little black bugs, I mean, it was a city in there. I was surprised. And you could see the capillary action of the earthworms and some scaly critters that the one expert knew what they were. And so our fly problems are greatly reduced by the fact that our manure goes away so fast. If we were to follow our cows with chickens, they would have to be within 3 days, 3 or 4, or even less, really, of where the cows were. There wouldn't be much dung left for them to scratch through. And that's it. I'm almost out of time as it is, so I'll stop right there.
Thanks so much, George. I have a couple of questions for you. I'm getting some messages and some texts and all kinds of stuff. So we'll get through as many as we can before it's time to move to the next session. Can you talk a little bit about your procedures with converting your herd to grain-free? Did you just go cold turkey? Did you do some sort of transition? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, I can. We never actually, when I came home, our farm hadn't been turned over, and it was a sudden death in the family. So I lost all equipment and livestock to tax court, but I was able to hang on to the land. I didn't lose any land, fortunately. And so I only had grass, and I did plant some corn. Thought that would work as a way to bring grain in without actually having to buy feed, because I had no way to make it. That didn't work because it'll keep their weight through the winter, but they won't gain weight. Plus, that wouldn't have worked for grass-fed, and it was later that we got into grass-fed. But we're not set up to do anything but grass and the 20 acres of corn, which really works for the cows because they're only getting 4 or 5 ears of corn a day. If I get a real cold, windy day like the one I showed a picture of, I will open up a little bit bigger strip so they get more of the carbohydrates to make it through the cold. But we never started with grain, so we never had. It was not hard to get away from it because we just didn't have it. Oh, I lost you.
No, I'm muted. Sorry. Speaking of your cows and corn, do you have any issues with any mold late in the season in your standing corn as it goes through the weathering process?
The only time I've ever seen mold is 2018 when we had all that cloudy weather. We had 19 days. We have a 10K solar system. We had 19 days from January 1st to September 29th that were sunny days. Worst year of farming I've ever experienced. We had a little bit of mold, but it didn't affect the cows at all because they're not getting very many ears. And it really wasn't very much. And in fact, we plant a long season corn, 105, 113 days, because it can dry down on the stalk. And actually the winds that we get, the dry down, we've only ever had mold that 1 year, and it was not noticeable in any way with the cattle.
Okay.
The only time I would think that might not work, like we can where we get deep drifts, we can still graze. It can drift right up to the ear. The cows, there's enough cows, they stamp it all down. But I was talking to a farmer that was here once. He's in the snow belt near Erie, where his snow, you know, it could be 6 feet of snow. I don't know how you'd even get them to the field. So there are situations where I don't think would work, but they're using it from in Uruguay and Colombia from a doctor here at Penn State who's from Colombia, and he's actually exported the whole idea there and fairly successfully, I guess. I haven't asked him about it, but I know they took that idea there.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask one final question. We have farmers that are with us today from all different sizes and types of operations. And you talked a lot about rotating frequently or just moving your cows frequently or sheep frequently. Do you have any recommendations for producers that are either just getting started with this type of operation or that don't have the ability to have such an intensively managed grazing system? Like maybe they're limited on their rotations or limited on land. Do you have any kind of final thoughts for those types of operations?
I do. You can do the same with cow-calf. Well, Dr. Alan Williams wants to come here and study the soil that we have because of the way we've stomped carbon in. And he says in the Northeast, there's only the average foot pressure per acre day is 5 pounds. Well, you don't get organic matter in that way. I would start a rotation system with whatever I had. If you had 10 animals, you could still get a density by putting them in smaller area instead of bigger areas and just move them. And if you work off the farm and you can only move them once every 3 days, that's still a big improvement. You can really change things quickly with the hooves of animals.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great presentation. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll go ahead and turn this recording off and then we will rejoin again at 1/4 after. Thanks everyone.
Oh.